Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and today I wanted to have some fun, and you'll notice a few states that have 0 electoral votes. For example, Maine at large. It's listed as 0 here, it's listed as 1, but it's 0, right? So I could say, hit this. Yeah, exactly, and it won't change, which is nice. So I'm going to go to paint mode. Notice how it doesn't add anything. Okay? And the reason why I've done that, crap, I just want paint, and where's the center tool? Whatever. Anyway, I've also properly accounted for the fact that states would lose senators. So the Electoral College would look something like this. And you can actually figure out which states have which. For Texas, in order to join the states, actually sold off their extra land, so they won't get New Mexico, Colorado, or the bits of Wyoming, Oklahoma, and I think Kansas. Maybe Kansas, that they had in their when they were a republic, right? And because there were so many proposed divisions of the Southwest, it's just not worth it to talk about what the original divisions were, because Utah claimed to be its own little thing under the Mormons. They called Deseret. Pretty cool story on that one, by the way. Arizona and New Mexico had multiple different proposed divisions between them, between the north-south one and an east-west one, which we wound up getting. Colorado is always its own weird thing. Same thing with a lot of these territories out here. The Dakotas, however, I have unified because they at one point were unified as the Dakota Territory, but they were split into two for whatever reason. The Midwest is also kind of like that, and their divisions are just really weird, but there's easy landmarks for most of them, other than the straight lines in some cases. So really the only states that gain anything are east of the Mississippi. For example, Georgia gets Alabama and Mississippi, so I just added their electoral votes to Georgia's 16, so 16 plus 9 plus 6, and I took off 4 because that region is losing 4 senators, 2 from Alabama, 2 from Mississippi. North Carolina used to be part of just the Carolina territory, really the Carolina colony, and then it split fairly early on. But I'm unifying them with South Carolina again, and adding in Tennessee. West Virginia, I'm adding with Kentucky and Virginia, because Virginia used to extend all the way to the Mississippi and have its northern bound be the Ohio and Potomac. And yeah, that's the way that one works. And of course, theirs has been added to Virginia. Again, take off 4 senators because these 2 states kind of lose theirs. North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee lose theirs. And for the last one, we actually have Massachusetts clocking in at a whopping 13 electoral votes now because they've had Maine added on. And this is to demonstrate that, guess what? Maine used to be part of Massachusetts, and it even was under the guise of the United States. But when Alabama was added to the Union, Maine was the compromise that you had to split off the non-contiguous part of Massachusetts to form the state of Maine. So, what would this mean for the Electoral College? Well, we're going to start by filling in what are now solid states, and I'm just going to list the entire state. North Carolina is no longer a competitive state. It's not a swing state. Georgia, not a swing state. Of course, have this area. Actually, I'll come back to the now large state of Virginia, which kind of looks like the actual current state of Virginia, just scaled up, because you have the whole little whoop, go back up north again, and now it just goes further north to begin with. Then when it dips, it does the same thing, just in a less dramatic way in some regards. Indiana. I'm not really going to consider Texas. Yeah, North Dakota would definitely be safe. I won't really consider that. I'll consider Texas a little bit less. We'll come back to Texas because it is swinging. Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana, those are relatively safe. Same thing with Alaska. Okay, so that puts us at 134, and I think it was, I forget what the actual total would be. We're also going to go here. I've also taken away Maine's electoral vote split because I think that'd just be too hard to do for Massachusetts. We'll come back to New Mexico, though that's pretty much safe. I don't think anybody would argue with that. Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, District. So this is a relatively interesting map if you think about it. Not much has changed, but the Republicans have less votes to start off with because Virginia, as far as I can tell, would only still be likely, would only go to likely Republican, even when adding in two states that have, when combined, a larger, actually no, the exact same size, which is really weird. And the way I did this is I just added the votes for the two-party share. It winds up being less than 10% in favor of the Republicans, but it is in favor of the Republicans, so that does matter. Ohio, and this is again confidence margin, I consider Ohio and Iowa to be fairly Republican, despite in Iowa 3 Democratic congressmen. It has 2 Republican senators, a Republican governor. Their state legislature is controlled, is a Republican majority in both houses. I think it's safe to say that it's a Republican state. Or at least you won't turn many heads by saying it's a Republican state. Texas, again, I'm considering it likely Republican. We're going to go throw in Florida, which is, in my opinion, it's a leaning Republican state. It's easier for a Republican to win the state than a Democrat, as evidenced by 2016, 2018. And it was always one of the more competitive states during Obama's elections, even in 2008, which was, at the very least, it was an electoral landslide. Popular vote, he was getting close to that margin. It was about a 7-point gap. For me, a popular vote landslide is 10% or more, being the margin of victory. Iowa is a true toss-up state. I think my partisan lean has it at leaning Republican, or not leaning Republican, just tilting Republican. I'm going to actually just tilt this to I'm going to lean this to the Democrats just to be fair, though. I think it will be easy. Then again, it is easier for Republicans to win it than Democrats in close elections. But they are 100% a swing state. They've got 2 Democratic Congress people. They have 2 Democratic senators. They have a Republican governor. And they're split in the state legislature, if I remember correctly. Both Michigan and Minnesota are leaning Democratic. New Mexico, I consider that a likely Democratic state or even a safe Democratic state, so I'm actually going to leave it in the safe category. It's right on that edge where you could make an argument that it's a competitive state. Now, here's the funny thing. The election is competitive. A Democrat could easily win this election, though the Republicans are much closer, and I forget what the margin would be. Let's see if I can hit it on the nail. Okay. So that would put them over the top. We'll put them right at that edge. Would it be 9 and 4? Huh. Maybe it would be 9 and 5. I'm just curious. So we take off a vote and then add Nevada. Okay, so 9 and 6 does it, but 9 and 5 doesn't. That's actually very good to know. Okay. So you need 262 to win. 261 would be a tie. So, obviously, Colorado is moving more Democratic as years go by. Same thing with Nevada, and Arizona is kind of in that lean to tilt category for the Republican Party. And this leaves 3 swing states. And as far as the data I have, and my personal method of identifying partisan index, whether a state's more Republican or Democrat, both of these states and the entire Rust Belt, in fact, is moving towards the Republican Party. Most partisan voter indexes show this when they take into account the elections in recent history, so from the mid-90s onwards. And this is adjusting for the national vote margins in all the elections and the winner. And the way you do that is you take two-party. I've explained it before in my future margins video. You can watch that if you want to get really geeky into math and data. I explain it fairly in detail there. But it's really just about controlling for the variables of the margin of the election. And really just figuring out how much more Republican or Democratic a state went in that election by comparing their margin to the national vote margin. So if, say, a Democrat won, so for example in 2016, Trump won Wisconsin by about 2%, despite losing the election by 3. That means Wisconsin was 5 points more Republican as a whole in 2016. Similar story with Pennsylvania, similar story with Michigan, a little bit less, right? Virginia voted like the nation as a whole in 2016. Though you can make an argument that this was because of the, on average, 3-point swing a vice presidential candidate provides in their home state. Minnesota, here's a great one. Trump lost by 1.5%, despite losing nationally by 3%. This indicates, guess what? State's about a 1.5 more Republican than the nation as a whole. And you can argue with that all you want, but that's what the numbers say. Okay? They voted, or more accurately, they voted less Democrat. Okay? So Pennsylvania, as far as I can tell based off of my model and a lot of the information I'm getting, is actually slightly more conservative than Wisconsin, which is kind of funny because I had been saying that Wisconsin was more conservative too, because of actual results rather than formula and model and all that. And when I say actual results, I was talking, of course, about Scott Walker and the fact that Republicans seem to be outperforming in both the House vote and the Senate votes in the state. But sometimes there's a weird local dynamic. And particularly with Scott Walker, it was that gubernatorial elections are rarely nationalized. So local issues take precedent over that. So I'm going to tilt this one, and I'm going to tilt Pennsylvania. Obviously, that puts the Republicans over the top. But you have to remember, the Republicans have lost, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 10. That's 14. The Republicans have lost 14 votes. Actually, 15 if you count a congressional district in Maine, or I guess Massachusetts in this example. And the Democrats have lost a whopping 2 electoral votes. But it is interesting to look at this map if breaking off a part of the state wasn't allowed. But then you'd have the problem of, well, they didn't really consider, this is another weird one. I had to determine whether or not to count Vermont as part of New Hampshire or part of New York, or leave it as its own thing. And that's because Vermont was a disputed territory between the two states that got congressional approval to become a state because they didn't want to side with one state over another. I also was debating whether or not to combine Oregon and Washington, simply because I thought that, but I left them separate because they have a very well demarcated border in the Columbia River, and they never really, even though they were listed as the Oregon Territory, at one point it included Idaho, parts of Nevada, parts of California, if I remember correct. No parts of California, no parts of Nevada. Parts of Montana, and it extended all the way up into British Columbia, if we all remember the saying 54-40 or fight. Yeah, so I really didn't consider those two to be part of the same state at any point in history. I think that wouldn't be fair to the residents of either state, but considering colonial claims and initial early claims all the way to Mississippi, I considered that fair game because we weren't sure if those were going to be considered part of state or whether those would be territories, and West Virginia at the very least was definitely a part of Virginia. And Kentucky was a part of Virginia as well. The only problem was that it was starting to get its own identity even at the time of the American Revolution, and this is because of the Appalachians. If I get a camera in the next couple of weeks or so, I'm going to drive on over to a town in the area that I live in and and kind of explain the history of why West Virginia and Kentucky are not part of Virginia. And it has to do with something called the Proclamation Line of 1763. And maybe I'll talk about that from a portion that is actually marked. And yeah, I can actually go to some colonial history out in the middle of Appalachia, which is awesome. Anyway, thank y'all for watching, and I'll see if I can do an election night in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to try and have one ready by a specific day, and it'll be a fun one, I think. I think y'all appreciate it. So take it easy. Have a nice day. Hope you enjoyed. Bye.